Chapter 1. The Message She Was Afraid to Open. Margaret Ellis spent 40 years wondering if her son would ever look for her. When he finally did, she almost deleted the message. Her finger hovered over the trackpad, stiff and pale under the kitchen light. The laptop screen had gone dim once already from waiting on her. All she had to do was move the cursor a little to the left, close the message window, log out, and let the house return to what it had been that morning. Quiet, orderly, and survivable. Instead, she sat very still. The message was 6 days old. 6 days. Margaret read the timestamp again, as if the small gray letters might correct themselves out of mercy. They did not. The message had been sent the previous Tuesday afternoon while she had been at the grocery store buying milk, instant oatmeal, and a rotisserie chicken she had eaten in 3 separate meals because cooking for one still felt, after all these years, like a minor defeat. For 6 days he had been there, not in the way she had imagined him as a baby, wrapped in hospital cotton, and taken through a door she had not followed. Not in the way she had imagined him at 10, at 16, at 30, faceless and safe in some better version of the world. He was not a thought now, not a punishment, not a prayer. He was a message. His name was Daniel Mercer. Margaret Ellis was 63 years old and lived alone in a small house on the east side of Tucson, where the afternoon sun pressed itself against the windows as if trying to get in. She kept the blinds half closed, and not because she disliked light, but because too much of it showed dust on the baseboards and age in her hands. Her kitchen table was small, square, and covered in a vinyl cloth with faded lemons on it. There was a chipped mug beside the laptop. There was a folded dish towel near the sink. There was a narrow cabinet by the hall where, behind old tax folders and a sewing tin, a cardboard box had survived every move she had ever made. In 1985, Margaret had given birth to a baby boy. That was the clean way to say it, the legal way. The way forms and medical records and careful people said things. She had given birth to him, and then she had signed papers, and then he had belonged somewhere else. For years, she had told herself that belonged was the wrong word. Babies did not belong like furniture. Children were not possessions. He had been placed, adopted, given a life, given a home, given things she could not have provided at 25, with no husband, no savings, and no one in the room who believed love was enough. But there were nights when all the better words failed her, and the plain one remained. She had lost him. The DNA kit had come in January after an article she had read at the library about adopted adults finding biological relatives through ancestry websites. She had carried the box around for 3 days before opening it. She had spit into the little plastic tube with a strange, humiliating seriousness, as if her body were being asked to testify after decades of silence. Then she had mailed it, told herself not to expect anything, and checked the website every morning for 2 weeks. When the results finally came, she stopped checking. It was ridiculous, cowardly, almost funny in the cruel way life could be funny if a person had no strength left to be offended by it. She had wanted an answer for 40 years, and when the answer began approaching, she had turned off the porch light. Now the answer had knocked anyway. Margaret leaned closer to the screen. Daniel's profile picture was small. A man in a blue shirt, standing outdoors, one hand lifted against the sun. Brown hair with some gray at the temples, a face neither familiar nor unfamiliar, which was worse. She could not say he looked like her, not exactly. She could not say he did not. His jaw was broader than hers. His eyes were darker, but there was something in the set of his mouth, a guardedness that struck her so suddenly she had to look away. She had imagined a child for so long that the man felt like a stranger who had walked into the wrong room carrying her grief. The message sat open beneath his name. Hello, I hope this isn't too strange. The site says we may be closely related. I was adopted as an infant, and I've been looking for some answers about my biological family. I don't want to intrude if this is unwelcome, but if you're open to it, I'd be grateful to know anything you're willing to share. No accusation, no demand, no cruelty. That should have made it easier, it did not. Margaret drew her hands back into her lap. Her palms were damp. She rubbed them against her jeans, then felt foolish for it, as if Daniel could see her through the screen and judge the weakness of her fingers. Anything you're willing to share. There were things she was willing to share, and things she had spent 40 years surviving by not sharing. There was a difference, and the difference was sitting in her cabinet in a box with softened corners. Her eyes went to the hallway. Not the cabinet itself. She could not see it from where she sat, but she knew exactly where it was. Second shelf from the bottom, behind the blue sewing tin, under a stack of warranty booklets for appliances she no longer owned. Inside the box was a hospital bracelet, brittle with age, a paper with a name written in her younger handwriting, a photograph of herself at 25 taken before her face learned how to hide things properly. There were also letters she had written and never mailed, though mailed to whom, she had never been able to say. She did not get up. If she opened the box now, she would not answer him tonight. She knew herself well enough to know that. The box had a way of turning action into mourning. It invited her to sit on the floor, to touch each thing, to remember until remembering felt like doing something. It was not doing something. It never had been. Daniel had not asked for her grief. He had asked for answers. Margaret placed her hands on the keyboard. The blank reply box looked indecently white. "I'm your mother." Her whole body recoiled before she could even read it back. No. She held the delete key down until the words vanished. Mother. As if the word were hers to pick up after leaving it untouched for 4 decades. As if another woman had not heard his fevers, packed his lunches, signed his school forms, stood in doorways waiting for him to come home. Margaret had no right to walk into a stranger's inbox, wearing that word like a coat she had misplaced. She typed again. "I gave birth to you. Cold, awful. True in the way a hospital chart was true." She deleted it. "I'm sorry." The word sat there, small and exhausted. She almost laughed, but it came out as a breath with no humor in it. Sorry was what you said when you bumped someone's card at the store. Sorry was what you wrote when you missed a phone call. Sorry could not hold a baby being carried away. Sorry could not hold 40 years. Sorry could not hold the fact that he had written to her 6 days ago, and she had been too frightened to open the account. She deleted that too. The house made a sound around her. The refrigerator clicked on. Somewhere outside, a car passed slowly down the street. Ordinary life, continuing with rude confidence. Margaret pressed both hands flat on the table until the vinyl cloth wrinkled beneath her palms. What did a real answer look like? Not a claim, not a confession so large it crushed him. Not a performance of pain. She could not make him responsible for relieving her. She had done enough deciding for him before he ever had language. She thought of the message again. "I'd be grateful to know anything you're willing to share." He had been careful. Kinder than she deserved. Or maybe careful because kindness was safer than anger when you did not know what you were allowed to ask. Margaret swallowed. She typed slowly this time, one word at a time, as if each had to pass through a narrow door. "My name is Margaret Ellis. I believe I may be the woman who gave birth to you." She stopped. It looked too formal, too bare. But it did not steal anything from him. It did not ask him to feel. It did not name her mother. It did not pretend she was only a medical fact. It stood in the terrible middle, where most of her life had been. "I am willing to answer what I can, if you still want that." Her finger moved to the trackpad. For a moment, she could not press send. The kitchen seemed to tighten around her. The faded lemons on the tablecloth, the chipped mug, the dish towel folded because she had needed something to do after dinner. All of it looked suddenly staged, like the home of a woman pretending she had not been waiting her whole life to be interrupted. If she sent this, Daniel might hate her. If she did not, he might keep wondering. That was the part that moved her finger. Not courage, not forgiveness, not even hope. The thought of him wondering because she was afraid. Margaret clicked send. The message appeared beneath his, small and final. She pulled her hand back as if the laptop had gone hot. Nothing happened. Of course, nothing happened. It was late. He could be asleep. He could be at work. He could have written 6 days ago and regretted it. He could have decided the silence was answer enough. He could have a wife in the next room, children, a dog, a mortgage, a life so full that the woman who had given birth to him was only a tab he had forgotten to close. Margaret stood too quickly. The chair scraped against the floor. She carried her mug to the sink, though it was already empty, rinsed it, dried it, put it in the cabinet, then took it down again, because she had placed it on the wrong shelf. When she returned to the table, there was a new message. Her knees did not give way. She would remember that later. She remained standing, one hand on the back of the chair, her body refusing drama even when her heart had no such manners. The message was from Daniel. "Thank you for answering." Below that, another line appeared, then stopped, then another. Margaret watched the little typing dots come and go, as if somewhere a man she had once held for less than an hour was trying to decide how much of his life he could place in a sentence. Finally, the message appeared. "Did you give me a name?" Margaret's hand tightened on the chair. The kitchen blurred, not with tears at first, but with the force of something pushed up too fast from too deep. She was not in Tucson for a second. She was not 63. She was 25, her hair damp at her temples, her body split open by birth and fear. A nurse turning away. Ruth's voice near the bed. The small weight of him in her arms before anyone told her not to get attached. She had not said the name out loud in 40 years. Not once. The laptop waited. Daniel waited. And from the cabinet in the hall, from the box she had not opened, the name rose toward her like a door she had spent a lifetime holding shut. Chapter 2. The name she was told to forget. The baby cried before anyone let Margaret hold him. The sound came from somewhere beyond the half-open door, thin and furious, a living thing with no patience for paperwork or shame. Margaret turned her head on the pillow, too fast, and pain opened through her body in a hot white line. She made a sound she did not mean to make. "Easy," the nurse said, not unkindly. "You just delivered." Margaret tried to lift herself anyway. "Is that him?" The nurse glanced toward the hall. "Could be. There are 2 babies on the floor tonight." But Margaret knew. She did not know how she knew. She had never been a mother before. She had not known what to do with her hands when they brought her into the delivery room. Had not known when to breathe, had not known a body could be so frightened and still keep doing what it was made to do. But she knew that cry. It moved through her like something that had been living under her ribs for 9 months and had now been placed too far away. "That's him," she said. The nurse adjusted the blanket over Margaret's legs. "They'll bring him in when they can." When they can. Margaret stared at the ceiling tiles. One had a brown water stain near the corner, shaped almost like a map of a place no one would want to visit. The room smelled of bleach, old coffee, and her own sweat. Her hair stuck to her temples. Her hospital gown was damp at the back. Somewhere down the hall, her baby kept crying. Her baby. She let the words form inside her, where no one could hear and correct them. It was 1985, and Margaret Ellis was 25 years old. She had arrived at the hospital in a borrowed car with a paper bag of clothes, $11 in her purse, and Ruth sitting stiffly beside her in the passenger seat, telling her not to make a scene. The baby's father had left Tucson before her 7th month. He had taken his guitar, his boots, and the easy promises he had made when promising cost him nothing. Margaret had stopped saying his name before she stopped missing the version of him she had invented. She had been sleeping in Ruth's back room since October. It was not really a room. It was a narrow space off the laundry area with a cot, a dresser missing one handle, and a curtain instead of a door. Ruth had taken her in because family did that much, but not so much that anyone could mistake pity for approval. "You can't raise a baby on waitress tips," Ruth had said more than once. Margaret had not argued because Ruth was right about the tips. She had not argued because being right about one thing made Ruth sound right about everything. The baby cried again, shorter this time, almost hoarse. Margaret closed her eyes. She pictured him with a red face and tight fists. She pictured dark hair, though there was no reason to. She pictured the nurse wrapping him too firmly, not knowing he liked space to kick, because Margaret had felt those feet pressing under her ribs every night as if he were trying to make more room in a world already too small for him. The door opened. Ruth came in carrying her purse in front of her with both hands. She had changed from her work shoes into brown flats, but still looked uncomfortable and as if the hospital had asked something personal of her. She was in her late 50s then, broad-shouldered, practical, with hair she pinned up every morning and took down only when all necessary work had been finished. Her face had the tired firmness of a woman who had survived by not asking life to be gentle. "You look pale," Ruth said. "I just had a baby." Ruth's mouth tightened, not quite disapproval, not quite grief. "I know what you just did." Margaret turned her face toward the door again. "They haven't brought him." "They will. He's crying." "Babies cry." "Not mine," Margaret almost said, but the words felt childish even before she spoke them. She was 25, too old to sound like someone begging. Too young to understand that begging might have been the only honest thing left. Ruth set her purse on the chair and smoothed the front of her blouse. "The woman from the agency came by while you were sleeping." Margaret's body went still. "I wasn't sleeping. You were out of it. I heard things." Ruth looked at her then, fully. "Then you heard they found a good family." The cry in the hall stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Margaret pulled the blanket higher, though she was sweating. "I don't want to talk about that before I see him." "You need to be clear before you see him." "I said I don't want to talk about it." Ruth's face changed. Not anger. Something more dangerous because it believed itself calm. Margaret. It was the way she said her name that made Margaret feel 11 years old, caught with a broken plate in her hands. "You asked me to help you," Ruth said. "I asked for a place to sleep. And I gave you one. I drove you here. I sat out there for 9 hours. Don't make me the villain, because I'm the only person in this family willing to say what everybody else is thinking." Margaret turned away. The ceiling tile blurred for a second, then sharpened. "I can work more shifts. You can barely stand." "Not today, later." "And who watches him while you work later?" Margaret had answers. She had collected them for months like coins. She could trade babysitting with a woman from the diner. She could apply for assistance. She could move somewhere cheaper. She could sleep less. She could eat less. She could do what women did when no one gave them permission to survive. But spoken aloud, each answer sounded thin under the hospital light. Ruth lowered her voice. "They have a house." Margaret closed her eyes. "A real one," Ruth said. "The woman from the agency told me. The husband has steady work. The wife can stay home with him for a while. They've been waiting years." Him. Ruth had said him. For a moment, despite everything, Margaret's hand moved to her stomach. It was softer now, emptied and strange. He had been inside her that morning. Now other people knew his sex, his future, the shape of rooms he might sleep in before Margaret had touched his face. "They don't even know him," she said. Ruth's answer came too quickly. "Neither do you." The sentence landed so hard Margaret could not breathe around it. Ruth seemed to hear it after she said it. Her eyes flickered, but she did not take it back. "I know enough," Margaret said. Ruth looked toward the hall, then back at her. "You know he needs more than love." Margaret's throat tightened. "Why does everyone say that like love is nothing? Because when the rent is due, it is?" The room held still. Outside, a cart rattled past. Someone laughed softly at the nurse's station. Ordinary sounds, vulgar in their normalness. Margaret wanted her mother. The want arrived suddenly and uselessly. Her mother had not come to the hospital. She had sent Ruth with a folded nightgown and a message that she was praying for wisdom. Margaret understood what that meant. Wisdom was what people called cruelty when it wore church clothes. The nurse returned before Margaret could answer. She carried the baby wrapped in a white blanket with a blue stripe near the edge. Margaret forgot Ruth. She forgot the agency woman. Forgot the house, the husband, the wife, the rent, the $11 in her purse. Her whole body reached before her arms did. The nurse smiled. "Here he is." Margaret held out her hands, then hesitated because she did not know where to put them. "Support his head," the nurse said. His weight entered her arms. It was nothing. It was everything. He was smaller than she expected and warmer. His face was swollen and red, his eyes closed tight, his mouth folded into a shape of complaint even in sleep. A dark smudge of hair lay damp against his head. One hand had escaped the blanket, fingers opening and closing as if testing the air. Margaret looked at him and felt no grand certainty, no holy music, none of the things women in movies seem to know. She felt terror first, then a tenderness so physical it hurt worse than the stitches. "Oh," she said. That was all, just a small sound, almost an apology. The baby's fingers opened again. She touched one with the tip of her index finger. His hand closed around it without strength, without intention, and still it felt like a decision. Ruth stayed near the foot of the bed. Margaret knew she was watching. She knew this was dangerous, the way she was looking at him, the way the room had narrowed around his breathing. She knew there were papers somewhere, and people waiting for her to be reasonable. But for the first time all day, nobody was speaking over him. "What's his name?" the nurse asked. Ruth shifted. Margaret looked up. The nurse glanced between them. "For the hospital bracelet, if you have one." Ruth said, "That won't be necessary." Margaret did not look at her. She kept her eyes on the baby. She had chosen the name in August, though she had told no one. She had been walking home from the diner after a late shift, one hand under her belly because he was pressing low, when she passed a church sign listing Sunday's sermon. "The Lord called Samuel." She did not remember the sermon topic. She did not even go inside that church. But the name had stayed with her because it sounded gentle without being weak. It sounded like someone who would grow into himself. "Samuel," Margaret said. The nurse paused with her pen above the clipboard. Ruth's voice came sharp. "Margaret!" "Samuel," Margaret said again, softer this time, but more certain. The baby stirred at the sound, or Margaret imagined he did. She lowered her face until her lips were near the fine, dark hair at his temple. "Samuel," she whispered. His name left her mouth and entered the room. For 1 minute, maybe less, he had a name no one could take from him because no one else had given it. Then Ruth came around the side of the bed. "Margaret, don't do this to yourself." Margaret kept her face near the baby. "I already did." A name doesn't change what's waiting when you leave here. He needs one. He needs a roof. Margaret looked up then. Ruth's eyes were wet, which made her harder to hate. "He needs diapers," Ruth said. "Doctors, heat in the winter, somebody who can stay home when he's sick." "You think I'm trying to hurt you? I'm trying to keep you from dragging him through the kind of life that eats people alive. He's not a mistake. I didn't say he was. You act like he is." "I act like he's a baby," Ruth said, the words low now, roughened by exhaustion. "And babies need more than what you can promise from a hospital bed." Margaret's arms tightened. The baby made a small sound, not quite waking. She loosened her hold at once, ashamed of needing him so badly that she might hold too tight. Ruth saw it. Of course she saw it. Her voice changed again, softer, and that was worse. "If you love him," Ruth said, "you will not make him pay for your wanting." Margaret stared at her. There it was. Not shouted, not cruel in the simple way. Something worse, because part of Margaret believed it. The nurse looked down at the clipboard. "I can come back." No one answered her. When she left, she took the clipboard, but not the baby. Margaret held him until her arms trembled. She counted the lines in his ear. She touched the soft place under his chin. She tried to memorize the exact weight of him, as if memory could become evidence later. Samuel. His name was Samuel. Ruth sat in the chair, purse on her lap, waiting. She did not hurry Margaret. That mercy felt like another kind of pressure. After a while, a woman from the agency came in. Her name was Mrs. Hanley, or Mrs. Hensley. Margaret would forget which almost immediately and hate herself for forgetting. The woman wore a navy skirt and carried a folder. She spoke gently. Everyone spoke gently when they were asking Margaret to survive something they would not have to remember in their bodies. "The adoptive parents are prepared," the woman said. "They understand this is difficult." Margaret looked at the baby, not the folder. They've been hoping for a child for a long time. Ruth said nothing. She did not have to. The woman explained the papers. Some words floated up and vanished. Consent, placement, irrevocable after a period, best interest, confidential. Margaret understood enough. She understood that a signature could do what labor had not done, separate what her body had made from what her life could keep. "Can I know where he goes?" Margaret asked. The woman's face shifted into practiced sympathy. "Not directly, but he will be cared for." "That's not what I asked." Ruth said, "Margaret." The baby woke then. His face wrinkled, his mouth opened, and he cried into the blanket. Margaret brought him closer, clumsy but quick. "I'm here," she whispered. The room changed after she said it. Even Ruth looked away, because it was true and not true. She was here. She was holding him. She was also sitting beside like a folder that would make here temporary. The agency woman waited with the patience of someone paid to outlast pain. The papers came onto the rolling tray beside the bed. Margaret stared at the pen. She thought of the back room at Ruth's house, the curtain instead of a door, the cot with the metal spring that complained every time she turned over. She thought of the diner manager who had told her she could come back when she was settled, which meant when the sight of her no longer made customers lower their voices. She thought of formula prices she had checked at the grocery store and pretended not to fear. She thought of walking home with a baby in the heat, of asking Ruth for more help, of Ruth saying yes with her mouth and no with every object she slammed into a cabinet. Then she looked at Samuel. Not the baby, Samuel. She wanted to stand. She wanted to wrap him in the hospital blanket, walk past Ruth, past the agency woman, past every person who thought they knew the size of her life, and keep walking until wanting became a plan. Her legs shook under the blanket. She did not stand. Ruth's hand came to rest on the edge of the bed, not touching Margaret, close enough to count. "Don't make him poor just because you're lonely," Ruth said. That was the sentence that did it, not because it was fair, because it found the place in Margaret that already feared her love was selfish. The pen was placed in her hand. Samuel cried once, then quieted. Margaret signed. Her signature looked wrong, too young, too narrow. A girl's name pretending it had the authority to end a mother's life. The agency woman took the papers back. Margaret waited for someone to gasp, to stop, to say there had been a misunderstanding. No one did. Ruth closed her eyes briefly. The woman from the agency slid the papers into the folder. And just like that, the room continued. The baby began fussing again. The agency woman said, "I'll take the baby now." Margaret did not move. "Just a minute," she said. No one gave her a minute. Not really. The woman stepped closer. Ruth stood too, as if her standing made the thing kinder because it made it shared. Margaret bent her face to his. "Samuel," she whispered, so low she barely heard herself. The agency woman's hands came under the baby's weight. Margaret tried to release him properly. She tried not to clutch. His blanket caught for a second on the hospital bracelet around her wrist. A small snag. Nothing. A bit of cloth resisting where she had not been brave enough to. Then he was lifted away. The woman did not call him Samuel. She said, "I've got the baby." The baby. Turn two happened so quietly that no one else heard it. The name Margaret had given him remained in her mouth while the world took him back into namelessness. She watched the door until it closed. Ruth sat down heavily. For a while, neither of them spoke. Margaret's arms stayed raised for a few seconds after he was gone. Then they lowered by themselves, empty and useless, on top of the blanket. Ruth took a tissue from her purse and pressed it under her nose. "You did the right thing." Margaret looked at her. The right thing was a phrase with no blood on it. She did not answer. By evening, they discharged her with instructions folded into a packet and a warning to rest. Ruth drove her home in silence. Tucson passed outside the window in flat blocks of sun and stucco and chain-link fences. People were pulling into driveways, carrying groceries, turning on porch lights. The whole city seemed to be receiving people back from the day. Margaret held the hospital bag on her lap. Inside was the nightgown her mother had sent, a comb, a toothbrush, and a scrap of paper she had taken when no one was watching. On it in pencil, she had written one word: Samuel. At Ruth's house, the back room smelled faintly of detergent and dust. The cot waited behind the curtain. Someone had removed the extra pillow she had used during the last months of pregnancy. Margaret sat on the edge of the cot without turning on the lamp. Her body hurt. Milk had begun to ache in her breasts. A cruel, practical proof that her body had not been consulted about the papers. From the kitchen, Ruth opened and closed a cabinet. A kettle went on. Ordinary life resumed, not because it was cruel, but because ordinary life did not know how to stop for what had no funeral. Margaret unfolded the scrap of paper. Samuel. She touched the name once, then folded it smaller. Smaller again. She tucked it into the side pocket of her hospital bag, behind the discharge papers, where Ruth would not see it. She told herself she would keep it only until she could bear to throw it away. She never threw it away. 40 years later, in a small kitchen in Tucson, Daniel Mercer's question waited on a laptop screen. "Did you give me a name?" And Margaret, who had been told to forget it, felt the old folded paper burning inside a box down the hall. Chapter 3. The question he had no right to ask. Daniel Mercer had a good childhood, which made the question feel almost cruel. Why did he still need a name from the woman who gave him away? He sat in his truck outside the hardware store, where he had meant to buy a replacement washer for the kitchen faucet. The old one had been whining for 3 days every time he turned the handle, a thin metallic complaint his wife had stopped pretending not to hear. He had come straight after work, still in his button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, his keys hanging from the ignition, the engine off, but the heat still trapped inside the cab. On the passenger seat sat a paper bag from the pharmacy, a receipt curled around a bottle of ibuprofen, and his phone. The phone had gone dark. Daniel did not pick it up again right away. He looked through the windshield at the store entrance. A man in paint-spattered jeans pushed out a cart stacked with lumber. A woman in a baseball cap argued with a boy about whether they needed light bulbs. Somewhere beyond the automatic doors, life remained practical and manageable. People came in needing screws, filters, tape, batteries, things with names and sizes and aisles. Daniel had come for a washer. Instead, he had asked a woman in Tucson whether she had named him before she let him go. He pressed his thumb against the steering wheel until the leather gave slightly. The question still sat there in the thread. "Did you give me a name?" He had typed it before he could talk himself out of it. Then he had put the phone face down on the seat, as if the screen itself had become rude. He was 40 years old. He paid a mortgage. He changed air filters. He knew how to sit across from clients who wanted impossible deadlines and not show irritation. He had stood beside his adoptive mother's hospital bed 3 years earlier and told her it was okay to rest, even though nothing in him had meant it. He was not a man who sent emotional questions to strangers from parking lots. But there it was, a name. The thing sounded small enough to ask for. It was not small. Daniel had always known he was adopted. His parents had not hidden it. His mother, Linda Mercer, had told him when he was too young to understand and then kept telling him in different ways as he grew older and carefully, gently, never like a confession. "We waited for you," she used to say, as if his arrival had been an answer to a question the house had been asking. He believed her. That was part of the problem. He had not been unloved. He could not even give himself the clean anger of that. His father, Paul, had taught him to ride a bike in the church parking lot because their street had too many cars. His mother had made pancakes shaped like lopsided bears on his birthdays until he was 12 and pretended to hate them. They had kept every school picture in a blue album with gold corners. They had sat through Little League games in summer heat, science fairs, orthodontist appointments, the awful 8th grade band concert when he had missed the same note 4 times and they had clapped anyway. He had been loved loudly enough that questioning what came before them felt like reaching past a full plate and complaining about hunger. His phone lit up. Daniel did not move. The screen dimmed again. He let it. A truck pulled into the space beside him. The driver got out, slammed the door, and walked away without noticing Daniel sitting there, like a man waiting for a sentence. There was a new message from Margaret Ellis. Only one word. Yes. He stared at it. Yes, she had given him a name. His mouth went dry so quickly he swallowed and felt nothing there. For all his life, his beginning had been described in careful adult language. Adopted as an infant, placed with a loving family, born in Arizona, records sealed, biological mother young, circumstances difficult. These phrases had structure, but no room in them. He had learned to live inside them, because everyone around him seemed relieved when he did. A name did not fit neatly into those phrases. A name meant someone had looked at him before signing anything. Someone had considered him specific. Someone had taken the blank space where he began and filled it, however briefly, with intention. Daniel set the phone down again, then immediately picked it back up. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. He almost typed, "What was it?" Too fast. He almost typed, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Wrong person. He almost typed, "Did my parents know?" He stopped. His parents. He glanced toward the little photograph tucked into the edge of the sun visor. It had been there so long the corners had softened. Linda and Paul Mercer stood on the back patio of their old house in Ohio, both squinting into sunlight. Linda holding a paper plate, Paul wearing the gray polo he had worn to every family cookout until it gave up at the collar. The picture had been taken before Linda got sick, before the word cancer entered the house and rearranged every ordinary habit around itself. Daniel had moved it from car to truck without thinking. Now he looked at his mother's face and felt a quick, childish shame. "I'm not replacing you," he said under his breath. The words sounded absurd in the cab. Linda, in the photograph, kept smiling into the sun. Daniel opened the message thread again. "What was it?" he typed. He stared at the 3 words. They seemed too bare, but he did not know how to dress them up without making them false. He pressed send before he could add anything polite around them. The reply did not come at once. That was worse than if it had. Daniel watched the screen. The typing dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. He could imagine Margaret on the other end, though he did not know what she looked like, except for the small profile image attached to her DNA account. A woman with short gray hair and a face turned slightly away from the camera. He had zoomed in on that picture after sending his first message, then felt embarrassed, as if he had been caught staring. The dots vanished. Nothing. He leaned back against the seat. Maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe the name was tied to someone she did not want to remember. Maybe she had typed it and found that she could not send it. Maybe she was crying. Maybe she was making dinner. Maybe she had other children who knew nothing about him. And his question had become an inconvenience in a life that had moved on. The last thought struck harder than he expected. He hated himself for it. He was not a child at a window. He was not waiting for someone to choose him. His phone lit. Samuel. Daniel stopped breathing for a second. Not dramatically, not like in movies. His body simply forgot the next step. Samuel. The name sat on the screen, plain and old-fashioned and impossible. It did not feel like him. That was his first thought, and it made him feel mean. He had been Daniel from the time memory began. Daniel on school papers. Danny to his mother when she was calling him in from the yard. Dan to coworkers who thought shortening a name was a sign of friendliness. Daniel Mercer on his driver's license, tax forms, medical records, the mortgage, his daughter's birth certificate as father. Samuel belonged to someone else. Then slowly the worst thought came. Samuel had belonged to him. Before Daniel, before Mercer, before Linda's pancakes and Paul's bike lessons and the blue album with gold corners, there had been a small space in the world where someone had called him Samuel. He read the name again. He tried to imagine Margaret saying it. He could not. He did not know her voice. A horn sounded somewhere across the parking lot. He flinched. The washer. He had come here for a washer. The thought arrived so uselessly that he almost laughed. Instead, he took the keys out of the ignition, opened the truck door, and got out because sitting there had begun to feel like being trapped with 2 names and no place to put either one. Inside the store, the air conditioning hit him too cold. His phone felt heavy in his pocket. At the end of the aisle, a little boy sat in the basket of a shopping cart, while his mother examined faucet handles. The boy was maybe 3, blond and serious, holding a plastic dinosaur by its tail. The mother said, "Eli, don't drop that." The boy dropped it immediately. Eli, a name tossed across a hardware aisle without thought. A name used to warn, scold, claim, include. Daniel gripped the basket handle. He wondered if anyone had ever said Samuel in a room with him. Had Margaret held him and tried the name out? Had a nurse heard it? Had someone written it on a form and crossed it out? Had his adoptive parents ever been told and decided Daniel fit better? Or had they never known there was anything to replace? He paid for the washers at self-checkout because talking to a cashier felt beyond him. In the truck again, he sat with the little paper bag between his knees and opened the message thread. Samuel, Margaret had written. Nothing after that. No explanation, no I'm sorry, no story. A part of him was grateful. A larger part was not. The name had opened a door, and she had left him standing in it alone. Thank you. He looked at the words and hated them. He deleted it. Worse, he deleted that too. He saw his mother, not Margaret, Linda, standing at the kitchen stove, turning pancakes too early because she was impatient with batter but patient with people. He heard her say, not long before she died, "If you ever want to look, honey, you should look." She had been in the recliner by then, a blanket over her legs though the house was warm. He had told her he didn't need to. She had smiled, as if she knew the difference between not needing and not being ready. "You won't hurt me," she had said. He had believed her because she was dying and people were supposed to tell the truth then. But she had not been there for this. She had not seen the name appear on his phone. She had not had to sit with the fact that another woman's first act of motherhood had reached him after her last act of motherhood was already memory. Daniel opened his eyes. The parking lot had thinned. The sun had dropped lower, throwing long shadows under the cars. He should go home. The faucet still needed fixing. His wife would ask if he found the washer. He would say yes. She would notice his face maybe and ask if he was okay. He would say something useless like long day. He did not want to carry another person's silence into his house. His thumb moved before his nerve could fail. "If you named me," he typed, then stopped. He erased the comma. "If you named me, why didn't you keep me?" No, it looked like an accusation thrown without breath. He added the comma back because grammar was a ridiculous place to look for mercy. "If you named me, why didn't you keep me?" There it was. The question he had no right to ask. Because he had been loved. Because his parents had wanted him. Because his childhood had been safe. Because no one owed a grown man the repair of an old wound that had not prevented him from becoming functional. There it was anyway. He pressed send. For a while there was nothing. Then the typing dots appeared. Daniel watched them with a strange, almost angry focus. He wanted her to answer. He did not want her to answer. He wanted the answer to be impossible, because then no one had failed him. He wanted it to be simple, because then he could know where to put the hurt. The dots vanished. A message appeared. "I can answer that, but not well enough in a message." Daniel read it twice. Another message followed. "If you're willing, I would like to meet somewhere public. No pressure. If you would rather not, I'll still answer what I can. No pressure." He almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because pressure had been there since the first match appeared. It was in his pocket, in the name Samuel, in the photograph of Linda and Paul above his head, in the wrong-sized washer sitting in the paper bag, in the sudden sense that his life had a room no one had shown him. He turned the phone over and looked again at the photo in the visor. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said. Linda smiled from the patio, bright and grainy, unable to tell him. Daniel sat until the cab cooled around him. Then he picked up the phone and typed with both thumbs because one hand was shaking too much. "Okay." He paused, then added, "Somewhere quiet." Margaret's reply came after a minute. "There's a coffee shop on Speedway, Sunday afternoon." Daniel thought of church traffic, grocery lists, the faucet, his father calling later that week, his wife asking what time he would be home. He thought of Samuel, a name that did not fit and would not leave. Sunday works. After he sent it, he did not feel better. That surprised him, though it should not have. A meeting was not an answer. It was only a place where the answer would have a face. Daniel put the phone down, started the truck, and sat with his hands on the wheel. In the rearview mirror, he looked like himself. 40 years old, tired, ordinary, Daniel Mercer. But somewhere under the name, he knew how to answer to. Another one had begun moving, quiet and insistent, toward Sunday. Chapter 4, The Woman Who Came Without a Claim. Margaret arrived with nothing that could prove she deserved to be forgiven. She had a cream-colored envelope, in her purse, a folded tissue in her sleeve, and a pain behind her ribs that made each breath feel borrowed. None of those counted. They were not evidence. They were not restitution. They did not turn 40 years into something smaller. The coffee shop sat on Speedway between a dry cleaner and a phone repair store, ordinary enough to be merciful. Margaret had chosen it because it had 2 exits, tables far enough apart, and no music loud enough to force anyone to lean close. She had arrived 38 minutes early, then spent 12 of those minutes sitting in her parked car, with both hands on the steering wheel, watching people enter and leave with cups, laptops, paper bags, all of them carrying lives that had nothing to do with hers. At 2:15, she went inside. The young woman behind the counter asked what she wanted. Margaret ordered tea because coffee would make her hands worse. When the girl asked what kind, Margaret stared at the chalkboard as if the choice mattered. Black is fine, she said. We have Earl Grey, English breakfast, chai, English breakfast. For here? Margaret almost said no. Leaving had been an option since she pulled into the lot. It remained an option now. Standing there under the smell of espresso and warm milk, with Daniel Mercer due in 15 minutes and her whole body arranged around not running. For here, she said. She chose a table near the window, but not directly in it. She placed her purse on the chair beside her, then moved it to the floor because keeping a chair blocked felt like presuming he would want to sit close. Then she lifted it back onto the chair because leaving it on the floor made the envelope inside feel exposed. In the end, she held the envelope in her lap. It was not much. A copy of the photograph from when she was 25, a small piece of paper with the name Samuel written in pencil, photocopied, because she had not yet found the courage to give away the original. A note with the date and hospital name. Not the whole box, not the bracelet, not the letters, not the other scrap with the partial name she had once known and done nothing with. That last thing sat at home because shame had a way of calling itself timing. Margaret looked at the door. Do not call him my son, she told herself. Not unless he does first. Do not touch him. Do not cry first. Do not make him take care of you. The tea steamed untouched in front of her. Her hands rested around the paper cup but did not lift it. On the wall opposite her, a framed print showed a desert sunset, all orange and purple, the kind sold in gift shops to people who wanted Tucson to look simpler than it was. Margaret focused on the black line of a saguaro until the bell above the door rang. She knew him before she had time to decide whether she did. Daniel Mercer stepped inside and paused just past the threshold, one hand still on the door. He looked like the profile picture, and did not. Taller than she expected. Broader in the shoulders, hair darker where the photo had caught too much sun. He wore jeans and a blue button-down with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. He scanned the room once, careful but not hesitant, like a man used to entering unfamiliar places and taking stock before choosing where to stand. Then he saw her. Nothing dramatic happened. He did not freeze. She did not stand with a cry. The room did not tilt for anyone else. A woman near the counter laughed into her phone. The espresso machine hissed. Someone's chair scraped lightly over the floor. Daniel's face changed only a little. That was enough. Margaret stood too quickly, bumping her knee against the underside of the table. The tea trembled but did not spill. Daniel, she said. His name sounded safer than any other word available. He walked toward her. Margaret? The question in it was polite. Necessary. It hurt anyway. Yes. She wiped one hand against her skirt before she could stop herself. Yes, hi. Hi. They stood facing each other with the small table between them, both suddenly too old and too young for what was happening. Do you want... Margaret gestured toward the counter. I can get you something. I'm okay for now. Of course. He pulled out the chair across from her. Not the one beside her. Across. She noticed and hated herself for noticing. They sat. For a few seconds, neither of them touched anything. You found it okay? Margaret asked. Yeah, I used maps. Right. A faint, strained smile moved at one corner of his mouth. That usually works. She almost smiled back, grateful for the small, ordinary thing. Then the gratitude made her feel greedy. I wasn't sure about parking, she said. It's not bad on Sundays. No, the conversation fell. Margaret looked at his hands. They were resting on the table, fingers loosely linked. There was a plain wedding band on his left hand. His nails were short. One knuckle had a small healing cut across it. A working hand, a hand that had fixed things, held things, belonged to a life that had managed perfectly well without her. Daniel followed her gaze and slipped his hands into his lap. I'm sorry, she said. For what? For staring. It's okay. It was not, but he let it pass. A barista called someone's name. Not his, not hers. A college-age boy collected 2 iced drinks and left. Daniel looked down at the table before speaking. I don't really know how to do this. Margaret's fingers tightened around the envelope in her lap. Neither do I. He nodded once. The honesty seemed to steady him more than any comforting answer would have. I almost didn't come, he said. I thought you might not. Did you want me to? The question was simple, and it still struck her as dangerous. Yeah, she said. Then, because yes was too bare and too hungry, she added, but I would have understood. Daniel looked at her then, directly. Margaret held still under it. His eyes were brown. Not her brown, not exactly. There was something in them she recognized less as resemblance than as restraint. A person holding a door closed from the inside. I'm not here because I know what I want from you, he said. I don't. I know. I have parents. The sentence came out quick, almost defensive. Margaret nodded, and I know. You don't, actually. He did not say it cruelly. That made it worse. Margaret lowered her eyes. No, I don't. Daniel sat back slightly. For a moment, she thought he would soften, apologize for the sharpness. He did not. She was glad, in a way. Apologies would only clutter the table. My mom died 3 years ago, he said. Margaret's heart shifted painfully. I'm sorry. He gave a small nod, accepting the sympathy without inviting more. My dad's still in Ohio. He knows I'm doing this. Sort of. Sort of? He knows I did the DNA test. He doesn't know I'm here today. Margaret did not ask why. The answer was in his face. On the table beside his phone, Daniel had placed his wallet. It was open just slightly, not enough to seem deliberate. Inside, behind the clear plastic sleeve where a driver's license might go, she could see the edge of a photograph. An older couple on a patio, smiling into sun. The woman had short blonde gray hair. The man stood with one arm around her shoulders. Margaret saw it and understood, with a force that made her look away, that Daniel had not come alone. He had brought them without bringing them. I don't want to take anything from them, Margaret said. His gaze moved back to her. I need you to know that, she said. Whatever I say today, whatever I answer, I'm not here to claim something they earned. Daniel's mouth pressed into a line. That was the first turn. She felt it not as relief, but as a slight change in the air. He had expected her to reach. She had not. It did not make him trust her, but it made it harder for him to make her only one thing. He looked toward the window. Then tell me why. Margaret had known the question was coming. It had lived between them since the parking lot message, since the name Samuel crossed from her screen to his. Knowing did not prepare her. She set the envelope on the table, but kept her hand on it. In 1985, she began, then stopped. Daniel waited. Margaret took a breath. I was 25, I was working at a diner. I was living in my Aunt Ruth's back room. It wasn't a room exactly, more like a laundry space with a cot. Your father had left before you were born. His face did not change at the mention of father. That told her something. Maybe he had not expected anything there. Maybe he had already decided that part of the story could stay empty. I didn't have money, she said. I didn't have a car of my own. I didn't have anyone who thought I could do it. Did you think you could? The question was quiet. Margaret looked at the tea gone dark and untouched. Some days, yes. And other days? Other days, I was scared enough to believe whatever people told me. Daniel's jaw shifted. Ruth said the family was good, Margaret continued, that they had a house, that they'd been waiting. She said you'd have a better life. Did you meet them? No. His eyes flicked to hers. I never met them, she said. I was told about them. By Ruth. By Ruth and a woman from the agency. The word agency sat between them, clean and bureaucratic. Margaret hated it. I don't remember the woman's name, she said. Not clearly, Mrs. Hanley maybe. Hensley. I've tried to remember. It changes every time. Daniel looked down. Margaret forced herself not to fill the silence too quickly. I held you, she said. His eyes lifted. Not long, but I did. Her voice thinned and she stopped until it steadied. The nurse asked if you had a name. Ruth said it wasn't necessary. I said Samuel anyway. Daniel's face tightened just slightly. I whispered it, Margaret said. Near your hair. His hand moved on the table, then stilled. I signed the papers after that. She swallowed. I want to tell you I was forced. In some ways I was. I was weak, I was poor, I was ashamed. Everyone in that room knew how to sound more certain than me. She looked at him. But I signed it. The words landed with no decoration. Daniel did not rescue her from them. Good, she thought, though it hurt. I signed, she said again, quieter, and they took you. The coffee shop seemed to continue at a distance. Milk steaming, doorbell ringing, a spoon tapping ceramic. Margaret could hear all of it and none of it. Daniel's voice came after a long moment. Did you ever look for me? There it was. The harder question. The one that had waited behind the first. Margaret's hand tightened over the envelope. Yeah, she wanted to say. No, she deserved to say. The truth was uglier because it refused to be one word. I thought about it, she said. Daniel did not move. I know that's not the same. No, he said, it isn't. The plainness of it burned. Margaret nodded. No. She could have stopped there. She could have let him believe there had been nothing, no root, no possible crack in the wall. For 40 years, she had survived partly by telling herself that. It was not entirely a lie. It was only arranged kindly. She looked at the wallet again, at the sliver of the smiling woman who had raised him. I had a little information, Margaret said. Daniel's eyes came back to her. Not much, not enough for an address. Not enough that I knew where you were. But for a while, after the hospital, I knew part of the family name. Ruth heard it from someone, or she had seen it on something, I don't know. She told me once when she was angry, like it proved you were in better hands. What name? Margaret shook her head. I'm not going to say it wrong. I have it written down at home. His face went still in a new way. You wrote it down? Yes. And you didn't use it? The second turn happened then. She saw it cross his face. Not the shock of a man learning he had been given up, but the sharper injury of a man learning there might have been a thread and she had left it untouched. Margaret felt something inside her try to defend itself. I was young. I was broke. It was different then. Records were closed. Ruth told me not to. I thought I would hurt you. I thought I had no right. All true enough to be tempting. She did not say them first. No, she said. Daniel breathed out through his nose and looked away. I wanted to, she said, and heard how useless it sounded. I would take out the paper. I would look at it. I got as far as a phone book once. A phone book. The repetition was soft, almost disbelieving. It was 1986, she said, then hated herself for the explanation. I'm not saying that as an excuse. It sounds like one. Margaret accepted that. I was afraid, she said. I told myself if I found you, I could ruin the life they'd given you. I told myself a good mother would leave you alone, and maybe part of that was true. Daniel looked back at her. But not all of it, she said. Part of it was that if I looked and found out you were happy, I wouldn't know where to put myself. And if I looked and found out you weren't, her voice failed. She let it. She did not deserve elegance here. I don't think I could have lived with that. Daniel's hand closed slowly around his paper cup. So you kept the name? Yes. And the other name, the family name? Yes. But I didn't get either. Margaret closed her eyes. There it was. The pressure peak. Though no one raised their voice. He had put his finger on the exact shape of the damage. She had kept what he had lived without. When she opened her eyes, Daniel was looking at the table. I had a good life, he said. I'm glad. I need you to understand that I'm not saying I didn't. I understand. No, he said again, but this time there was no sharpness, only exhaustion. I don't think you do. My parents loved me, my mother. He stopped, swallowing the rest of the sentence. She was my mother. Yes, but I don't know what to do with the part where you knew my name and I didn't. Margaret felt the envelope under her hand as if it had warmed. I brought something, she said. Daniel's eyes flicked to it. Not everything, she said. I didn't think that would be fair. Just a copy of the name, a photograph, the hospital date. She slid the envelope forward a few inches, not all the way to him. You don't have to take it. He looked at the envelope. For a moment, she thought he would. His fingers lifted from the cup. His gaze held on the cream paper, on the edge where she had written nothing, because any label would have been too much. Then his hand lowered again. Not today, he said. The words were quiet. They struck harder than anger would have. Margaret nodded before she felt herself nodding. Okay, I'm not saying never. I know. He looked toward the window, where cars moved through sunlight as if the world had not just changed shape. I came here to hear why. I don't know if I can take things home yet. Okay, she said again. She wanted to say she was sorry. She wanted to say she had kept the paper because it was all she had. She wanted to say he could take all the time he needed and also please not disappear because she did not know if she had enough years left to survive losing him politely. She said none of it. Daniel stood. Margaret stood too because staying seated felt like asking him to leave alone. Thank you for meeting me, she said. He gave a small nod. Thank you for answering. It was such a civilized exchange that anyone watching might have thought something had gone well. At the door, Daniel paused. Not long, just enough for Margaret's body to betray hope. He did not turn back to hug her. He did not call her anything. He pushed the door open and stepped into the Tucson sun. Margaret remained standing beside the table until the bell above the door settled into silence. Only then did she look down. The envelope was still there, cream-colored, unopened, light enough to lift with 2 fingers. She picked it up and slid it back into her purse. Her hands moved carefully, like a person handling something breakable in public. Outside, through the window, Daniel crossed the parking lot without looking back. He got into his truck and sat there for a moment before starting it. Margaret watched until he drove away. Then she sat back down at the table with the cold tea, the empty chair across from her, and the envelope still in her possession. She had told the truth. It had not been enough. For the first time all afternoon, she understood that maybe it was not supposed to be. Chapter 5. The box she could not keep twice. Margaret had already kept one thing from him for 40 years. She could not survive keeping the rest. The envelope sat on the kitchen table where she had placed it after coming home from the coffee shop. Cream-colored, unopened, unwanted, at least for today. It looked smaller under her own kitchen light than it had looked between them at the cafe, as if Daniel's refusal had taken weight from it and put that weight somewhere inside her chest instead. She had not taken off her shoes. She had come through the front door, set her purse on the chair, removed the envelope, and placed it on the table with both hands. Then she had stood there, waiting for the house to tell her what to do next. The house told her nothing. It was the same kitchen as before, the same faded lemon tablecloth, the same chipped mug drying upside down beside the sink, the same narrow hallway leading to the cabinet where the box waited behind old papers and a blue sewing tin. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice, then gave up. A car passed, slowly. The refrigerator clicked on. Ordinary things had always been good at pretending nothing had happened. Margaret pulled out a chair and sat down. Daniel's words had followed her home. "I don't know what to do with the part where you knew my name and I didn't." She had told him the truth. Not all of it. That was the trouble with truth. Once a little of it came out, the rest began to feel less like privacy and more like theft. Margaret put one hand over the envelope. Inside was the copy of the name Samuel, the photograph, the hospital date. Safe things. Painful things, yes, but not the worst things. They showed she had loved him. They showed she had remembered. They showed she was not heartless. They did not show the folded scrap with the partial family name Ruth had once thrown at her in anger. They did not show the phone book she had opened in 1986, sitting cross-legged on Ruth's laundry room floor with her finger under the first letter of that name, too frightened to keep looking. They did not show that there had been, not a door exactly, but a crack. She had not stepped through it. Margaret slid the envelope toward the center of the table, then away from herself, as if distance might turn it into something finished. Daniel had not taken it. That should have been her answer. A better woman would leave him alone now, she thought. The sentence arrived in Ruth's old voice, wearing Margaret's own fear. He had a good life. He had parents, he had a mother who made pancakes and sat through school concerts and died with the right to be grieved. He did not need Margaret arriving late with papers and pain. He had come, listened, and said not today. Maybe not today meant not ever, but he had been too kind to say it. Margaret could put the envelope back. She could slide it into the box, close the lid, return the box to the cabinet, and let Daniel decide whether to write again. If he did not, she could tell herself she had honored his boundary. She could call silence respect and make a little room to breathe inside it. She almost stood. Then she saw him at the cafe, his hand lowering instead of taking the envelope. Not angry, not cruel. Careful. He had been careful with her pain, even while she was the reason for his. Margaret closed her eyes. For 40 years, she had told herself silence was a kindness because it spared him disturbance. But at the cafe, sitting across from the man who had once been Samuel for less than a day, she had understood something she had avoided all her life. Silence had spared her, too. It had spared her from hearing him ask why. It had spared her from finding out if he was unhappy. It had spared her from seeing his face when he learned she had known a little and still done nothing. Margaret opened her eyes. The envelope was no longer enough. She stood so quickly the chair gave a small scrape against the floor. In the hallway, she opened the narrow cabinet. The hinges complained. They always did. She moved the stack of old tax folders, the yellowed warranty booklet for a dishwasher she had replaced 7 years ago, the blue sewing tin with 3 buttons rattling inside. The box was at the back. It had once held winter boots. The brand name had faded into a gray ghost on the lid. One corner was soft from a leak in an apartment she had lived in during the 90s. There was no lock. There had never been a lock. She had not needed one. The shame had guarded it well enough. Margaret carried it to the table. For a moment, she only looked at it. Then she took off the lid. The smell came first. Paper, dust, old cardboard. A faint trace of cedar from the block she had once placed inside to keep moths away, though there was no fabric worth saving. Her body remembered the smell before her mind organized the contents. On top lay the photocopied hospital form she had requested years later and never admitted requesting. Beneath it, a small white envelope containing the hospital bracelet, brittle now. The ink faded, but still there. A photograph of herself at 25, standing outside Ruth's house in a loose yellow blouse, one hand lifted against the sun as if she had already begun refusing to be seen. She did not touch the photograph first. She reached for the folded paper with the name, the original. The pencil had faded, but the word was still legible. Samuel. Her younger handwriting looked urgent, the letters pressed too hard into the paper. She had written it on the first thing she could find after coming home from the hospital, as if a name not written down might dissolve into the air with everything else they had taken. Margaret laid it beside the cream envelope. Then she removed the hospital bracelet and placed it next to the paper. The tiny plastic strip looked indecently small. Not enough to prove a life, too much to ignore. The photograph came next. She almost left it out. Daniel did not need her young face. Maybe it would only make him compare, look for himself, find or fail to find something that would hurt either way. But he had asked for answers, not comfort. He deserved to know the woman who had made the decision, not only the old woman who now regretted it. She set the photograph down. At the bottom of the box, tucked inside a greeting card from a Christmas Margaret had not celebrated, was the other paper. She knew it by touch, thinner than the rest, torn from the corner of an envelope, folded twice, opened and refolded so often in the first years that the creases had become weak as cloth. Margaret did not pick it up immediately. Her hand hovered above it. This was the part she could still keep. The name on it was incomplete. A surname Ruth had mentioned once in 1986 when she was angry about Margaret asking too many questions. Maybe Ruth had known more. Maybe she had guessed. Maybe she had wanted to frighten Margaret away from trying. Margaret had written it down anyway, along with the town Ruth thought the family might have moved through before leaving Arizona. It might not have led anywhere. That was true. It might have led somewhere. That was also true. Margaret picked up the paper. Her fingers had gone cold. The old defense rose at once, practiced and ready. She had been young. She had no money. Records were closed. Ruth had told her she could damage his life. She had not known if the name was even right. She had not wanted to be one of those women who came knocking on a door and tore open a child's world because she could not bear her own. All of it was true enough to make a decent wall. Margaret was tired of walls. She placed the paper with the others. The table looked different now, not cluttered exactly, accused. She went to the drawer beside the sink and took out a pad of lined paper. The first page had a grocery list on it. Eggs, tea, laundry soap. She tore it off and set it aside. The next page was clean. She sat. For a long time, she did not write. The pen felt too light, a foolish tool for what it was being asked to carry. Finally, she began. Daniel. She stopped. Not Samuel. Not at the start. He was Daniel. That was the name he had lived under, the name his parents had used, the name that had held his life together without her. She continued, I brought only part of this today because I was afraid of asking too much from you at once. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. She stared at the sentence, too polished. She crossed it out. Started again. Daniel, I did not give you everything today. I told myself it was because you might not be ready. Some of that was true, but some of it was because I was ashamed. Her hand shook. She put the pen down, flexed her fingers, picked it up again. I am sending the things I kept, the name I gave you, the bracelet from the hospital, a photograph of me from that year, the date and place where you were born. She stopped before the next part. The house seemed to grow aware of her. The refrigerator hummed. The wall clock ticked. A truck passed outside with music faint through the windows. She wanted suddenly, absurdly, to wash the mug by the sink, to sweep the floor, to do anything practical enough to postpone becoming honest. Instead, she wrote, there is also a paper with a name on it. I do not know if it is complete. I do not know if it was accurate. It was something Ruth said after you were gone. When I kept asking questions, I wrote it down. Her breath shortened. I could have tried harder. She crossed out harder because it sounded like something said at funerals and meetings. She wrote beneath it. I could have tried. The words sat there, plain and unforgiving. She nearly crossed them out too. She did not. I did not. I was afraid. I told myself that looking for you would hurt you. I told myself that if you had a good life, I had no right to disturb it. I told myself a lot of things that made it easier to stay still. Margaret pressed the pen hard enough to tear the paper slightly on the period. She sat back. That was the turn. Not dramatic. No one entered. No voice called from heaven. Nothing in the room changed except that a sentence she had avoided for 40 years now existed in ink. Silence was no longer love, just because she named it that. She continued slower now. You do not owe me forgiveness. You do not owe me another meeting. You do not owe me comfort. But these things are yours. They should not stay in my house because I was too ashamed to let them leave. She looked at the word yours. For the first time all day, her chest loosened and hurt at the same time. She signed simply, Margaret. Not mother. Not yet, maybe not ever. She folded the letter, but not too neatly. She did not want it to look prepared. She wanted him to see, if he noticed such things, that this had cost more than organization. Finding a box for the box took 10 minutes. She almost laughed at the absurdity. The old boot box was too worn to mail by itself, so she found a shipping box in the closet, one left over from a lamp she had ordered and returned because it had been too bright. She wrapped the hospital bracelet in tissue. She put the photograph between two pieces of cardboard. She placed the original Samuel paper in a small envelope and wrote nothing on the outside. The torn paper with the partial family name went beneath the letter. Then she added the cream envelope from the cafe, unopened as it was. The last thing she placed inside was the photocopy she had meant to give him gently. There would be no gentle version now. Not because she wanted to hurt him, because gentleness had become too close to control. At the post office, the line was short. A man ahead of her mailed a package to Phoenix and argued mildly about the price. A woman behind Margaret smelled of sunscreen and held a stack of birthday cards. Ordinary life again, surrounding her with errands. Margaret held the box against her stomach. She had written Daniel's address carefully from the message he had sent after agreeing to meet. She had checked it 4 times before leaving the house. Still, standing there, she worried the numbers might rearrange themselves. That one wrong digit might send Samuel into another stranger's hands. When her turn came, the clerk was a young man with a neat beard and tired eyes. "Anything liquid, fragile, perishable, or hazardous?" he asked, already reaching for the scale. Margaret opened her mouth. Fragile. The word rose so fast it nearly escaped. The hospital bracelet was fragile. The paper was fragile. The photograph, the old name, the torn scrap. The letter with its ugly little sentence, "I could have tried." All of it was fragile. Daniel was not fragile, she reminded herself. He was a grown man. He had survived without her. He had built a life. But the part of him she was mailing back had never been handled by him before. "Ma'am?" Margaret looked at the clerk. "No," she said. Her voice sounded normal enough. He placed the box on the scale. Ground or priority? Priority. It cost more than she expected. She paid without thinking about it. The clerk printed a label, pressed it onto the box, and slid it behind him into a bin with other packages. Shoes, books, returns, gifts. Things going where they were supposed to go because someone had written an address. Margaret's hands remained on the counter after the box left them. The clerk handed her a receipt. Tracking numbers at the bottom. "Thank you." She stepped aside. Outside, the Tucson light was sharp enough to make her blink. Cars moved through the lot. Someone dropped a set of keys and cursed softly. A child tugged at his mother's hand near the automatic door. Margaret stood by the trash can and looked at the receipt. The tracking number meant she could watch every movement. Accepted, departed, arrived, delivered. She could refresh the screen, follow it across the city, across whatever distance stood between her and Daniel, and pretend that watching was not the same as clinging. She folded the receipt once. Then again, she put it in her purse. She would keep it, of course she would. But the box was gone. That was the part that mattered. For 40 years, she had been the only person who could open the old lid and decide how much of Samuel existed in the world. Now the truth was traveling without her permission, without her hands over it, without her ability to take it back if Daniel hated her for what was inside. Margaret walked to her car slowly. At home, the kitchen table was bare except for the pad of paper, the pen, and a faint rectangular mark in the dust where the old boot box had sat for part of the afternoon. She did not wipe it away. By evening, Daniel would not have it yet. Maybe not tomorrow either. The Postal Service would take its time, as ordinary systems did. But the old house felt different already. Lighter was not the word. Emptier was closer. More honest, maybe, but she did not trust a word that clean. Margaret stood in the doorway and looked down the hall toward the cabinet. The blue sewing tin was still there, the tax folders, the useless warranty booklets. The cabinet could close now without hiding him. She shut the door gently. That night, across town or farther away, Daniel had not yet seen the box. He had not yet opened the envelope with the name Samuel in her younger hand. He had not yet found the torn scrap or read the sentence Margaret had written and left uncrossed. I could have tried, but the box was moving toward him. And for the first time since the hospital, Margaret was not the one holding it shut. Chapter 6, The Name Between Them. Daniel did not open the box when it arrived. He carried it inside from the front step with the rest of the mail tucked under one arm. A grocery flyer, a water bill, a postcard from the dentist reminding him he was overdue for a cleaning. The box was not large. Brown cardboard, plain label, his name written in careful black ink above the printed postage. Ordinary enough that a neighbor passing by would have thought nothing of it. That was the problem. It should have looked different. It should have warned him. He set it on the kitchen table and stood over it with his keys still in his hand. The house was quiet. His wife was still at work. The faucet he had fixed after meeting Margaret no longer whined when turned, which had seemed like a victory 2 days ago and now felt like a detail from someone else's life. Late sunlight came through the back window and caught the edge of the cardboard, turning one corner gold. Daniel put the dentist postcard beside the sink, then moved it to the counter, then picked it up again and dropped it into the trash because ordinary things were suddenly asking too much of him. The box remained where he had left it. He walked past it once to get a glass of water. He drank half and set the glass down without feeling the cold. He went into the living room, turned on the television, watched 3 silent minutes of a home renovation show, and turned it off again. He came back to the kitchen. The box had not changed. His name sat on top of it, Daniel Mercer. He stared at the letters. A name his mother, Linda, his mother, had written on school forms, birthday cards, lunch bags, the inside cover of books when he was young enough to lose everything. A name his father had shouted across Little League fields and used in stern full when Daniel dented the garage door with a borrowed car at 17. A name his wife had taken into her daily life without question. A name that had carried him, held him, introduced him to the world. Now another name waited inside a box. Daniel pulled out a chair but did not sit. He did not want to open it standing. He did not want to open it sitting. There was no posture for receiving a life you had not known belonged to you. Finally, he took a knife from the drawer. The tape split too easily. That bothered him. Absurdly. It should have resisted. It should have understood that once opened, the box could not become sealed again in any way that mattered. Inside was tissue paper, folded with care but not prettiness. No ribbon, no card on top. Nothing arranged to manipulate him. He was grateful for that. And then angry at himself for being grateful. He lifted the first layer. The envelope came into view first. Small, white, unmarked. He knew before opening it. His fingers hesitated anyway. Inside was a piece of paper, old and thin, protected by a clear sleeve. The pencil had faded, but the word was still there. Samuel. Not typed, not copied, written by hand. The letters leaned slightly right. The S pressed harder than the rest, as if the person writing it had been afraid the word might disappear unless she dug it into the page. Daniel sat down. The chair creaked under him. He placed the paper on the table and drew his hand back as though the name might bruise if touched too long. Samuel. He had seen it on a screen. That had been different. On a screen, it had been information. Here, in the pressure of pencil, on old paper, it was an action. A young woman had written it. A young woman had needed to keep it. A young woman had carried it forward long after everyone else had stopped using it, if anyone else ever had. He did not soften. Not exactly. Something opened, but it opened into anger too. Daniel reached into the box again. A hospital bracelet came next, wrapped in tissue. The plastic had yellowed. The print was faded nearly to ghost markings. But there was a date, a hospital name, numbers that had once been enough to identify a baby before the world decided what else to call him. He set it beside the name, then a photograph. Margaret at 25 stood outside a small house, one hand raised against the sun. Her hair was dark and loose around her face. She looked tired, too thin. Younger than his daughter would be one day, which made something in him reject the comparison before it could finish forming. He did not want pity. Pity would make the anger harder to hold, and he needed the anger. It was the only thing in the room that felt unquestionably his. He turned the photograph over. Nothing written on the back. That restraint almost hurt more than if she had labeled it with some careful phrase. There was a folded letter beneath the photo. Daniel did not open it immediately. He sorted the rest first, because reading her words felt like allowing her voice too near. A copy of a hospital form. A note with the date and place of birth. The cream envelope she had tried to give him at the cafe, still sealed. And beneath all of it, a torn scrap of paper folded twice. He opened that one because it looked least prepared. A partial surname, a town name. Maybe right, maybe not. Written in a different slant than Samuel, rushed, smaller, almost hidden from itself. He knew what it was before the letter confirmed it. His stomach tightened. This was the part that had followed him out of the cafe. Not the poverty, not Ruth, not the adoption papers. He could understand pressure. He could understand fear, at least from a distance. He could even understand a 25-year-old woman being pushed into a choice she could not take back. But this scrap was after the hospital, after the papers, after someone had handed her a thread, however thin, and she had kept it in a box instead of pulling. Daniel unfolded the letter. It began with his name, Daniel. He stopped there for longer than made sense. Not Samuel. She had known not to start with Samuel. He read on. The letter was not beautiful. It did not ask him to forgive her. It did not call him her son. It did not call herself his mother. It said she had not given him everything at the cafe because she was ashamed. It said the things in the box belonged to him. It said the old scrap might not have led anywhere, but it had existed. It said Ruth had mentioned the name after he was gone. It said Margaret had written it down. Then the sentence came. I could have tried. Daniel put the letter down. He stood so quickly the chair struck the wall behind him. No, he said. No one was there to answer. He walked to the sink, gripped the edge, and bowed his head over it. The faucet gleamed where he had replaced the washer. No more noise. Fixed, corrected, a small household problem solved because he had gone to the store, chosen the part, come home, turned off the water, done the work. He hated the faucet in that moment. He hated the simple obedience of things that could be repaired. He turned the handle, water rushed out clean and loud. He turned it off. The silence after was worse. He went back to the table and read the sentence again. I could have tried. It was the first thing she had given him that did not protect herself. That did not make it enough. He picked up the photo of Margaret at 25 and stared at her face, trying to find the woman from the cafe inside the girl by Ruth's house. He found something in the eyes, not innocence, not guilt. Something worse because it was both young and already defeated. You could have, he said to the photograph. His voice sounded flat. That was all. Not a speech, not a courtroom. Not the grand anger he might have imagined if he had known to imagine this. Just 3 words in his kitchen, said to a woman 40 years too late to hear them as the girl who needed to. He left the box open on the table. For the rest of the evening, Daniel did what he was supposed to do. He answered his wife when she came home and asked if the package had arrived. He said yes. She looked at his face, then at the box, then back at him. She did not ask to read anything. She touched his shoulder once, lightly, and said she would be in the other room if he needed her. He was grateful. He was irritated by his own gratitude. At dinner, he ate because the food was there. He rinsed his plate. He checked the lock on the back door. He put the water bill under the magnet on the fridge. Ordinary movements, one after another. The body's stubborn little claims that life continued even while the mind stood elsewhere. Later, alone in the kitchen again, he put the items back into the box, then took them out. Samuel, hospital bracelet, photograph, letter, torn scrap. He arranged them in a line as if order might reduce their power. It did not. When his phone buzzed, he nearly picked it up too fast. But it was not Margaret. A spam text about a package delivery. He deleted it. Margaret had not written. That surprised him. Part of him had expected another message, some anxious follow-up, some apology for the box, some need to know whether it had arrived, whether he had opened it, whether he hated her now. Nothing came. Her silence this time felt different from the old silence. And he did not know what to do with that either. The next morning, Daniel went to work. He left the box on the table. Halfway to the office, he turned the radio off because every song sounded like someone trying too hard. At a red light, he thought of the name Samuel and almost missed the green. A driver behind him tapped the horn. Daniel lifted one hand in apology and drove on. At work, people called him Daniel all day. Daniel, can you look at this estimate? Daniel, did the supplier call back? Daniel, lunch at noon? He answered each time. Every answer felt slightly delayed, as if another man had to decide whether to turn his head first. By 10:30, he had written Samuel on the corner of a notepad without realizing it. He stared at the word, then tore off the sheet, folded it once, and put it in his pocket instead of throwing it away. That annoyed him more than throwing it away would have. At lunch, he sat in his truck and called his father. Paul answered on the 4th ring, out of breath. Hey, Dan, everything all right? The ordinary warmth in his father's voice nearly stopped him. Yeah, Daniel said, just checking in. You sound tired. Long week. You fixed that faucet? Yeah. Good. Your mother would have said, call a plumber. Daniel closed his eyes. There it was. His mother in a sentence. Alive for half a second, in a joke his father had told because he missed her too. Dad, Daniel said. Yeah? He almost told him. Not everything. Maybe only that the woman had sent a box. That there had been a name. That he was angry and felt guilty for being angry. That he did not know how to hold Linda Mercer and Margaret Ellis in the same heart without betraying one of them. Instead, he looked through the windshield at the flat shimmer of heat over the parking lot. Nothing, he said. I just wanted to hear your voice. His father was quiet for a moment. Then softer, well, I'm here. Daniel's throat tightened. I know. After they hung up, he sat with the phone in his hand. I'm here. The words stayed. Margaret had written that she could have tried. Linda had once told him looking would not hurt her. Paul had said he was here without knowing what Daniel needed him to be here for. Everyone had given him pieces. None of them fit easily. By late afternoon, the anger had not gone away. It had changed shape. It was no longer a clean flame directed only at Margaret. It had edges now. At Ruth, at sealed records, at poverty, at kindness that came too late. At himself for wanting more, when he had already been given so much. But beneath it, stubborn and unwanted, was the name. Samuel. Not replacing Daniel. Not correcting him. only waiting. He went home before 6. The box was still on the table. His wife had not moved it. He loved her for that and did not say so because the sentence would have opened too much. He stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and found Margaret's number. He did not let himself rehearse. Rehearsal would turn the call into something cleaner than it deserved to be. He pressed call. It rang 3 times. On the 4th, she answered. Hello? One word, careful and small. Daniel looked at the box. I got it, he said. A slight breath moved through the line. Okay. Not, did you open it? Not, are you all right? Not, I'm sorry. Just okay. He hated how much that helped. I read the letter. Silence. Then, okay, I'm angry. The words came out harder than he intended. He did not take them back. You should be, Margaret said. That stopped him. He had expected apology, explanation, a flinch, something he could push against. Instead, she gave him his anger without trying to soften it for herself. Daniel turned away from the table and looked out the kitchen window. The yard was going dim. A plastic chair sat near the fence where no one had sat in weeks. I don't know what you want me to say to that, he said. I don't want you to say anything you don't mean. He gave a short breath, not quite a laugh. That's convenient. Yes, she said. The honesty in it struck him harder than a defense would have. I'm not calling to make you feel better, he said. I know. And I'm not saying I understand. I know. He closed his eyes. Too many I knows. Too quiet. Too much room left for him to be cruel if he wanted to. He did want to, a little. Not because cruelty would help, but because pain sometimes looked for a tool and found the nearest person. You had a name for me, he said. Yes, and you kept it. Yes, and you kept the other one too, the family name. Yes, but I didn't get any of it. No, Margaret said. The word was barely sound. Daniel opened his eyes. The anger was still there. But alongside it, without asking permission, came the image of a 25-year-old woman writing Samuel on a scrap of paper because the world had taken everything else she could call him. He did not forgive her. He did not want to forgive her yet, but he wanted something. That was the dangerous part. He looked at the handwritten name on the table. When you named me Samuel, he said, then stopped. On the other end, Margaret did not speak. He tried again. When you named me Samuel, did you say it out loud? The line went so quiet, he wondered if the call had dropped. Then he heard her inhale. Yes, she said. The word broke in the middle. Daniel sat down. He did not know he was going to until the chair was under him. Where? He asked. The hospital. Was I? He stopped, embarrassed by the need in the question. He was 40 years old. He had survived without knowing whether he had been sleeping or crying or held. But now that the question had formed, not asking it felt like leaving something behind again. Margaret waited. Was I awake? He asked. I don't know, she said. Not fully. You were making little sounds. Your hand was out of the blanket. Daniel looked at his own hand on the table. What did you do? I touched your finger. His fingers curled before he could stop them. Margaret's voice was quieter now, but steadier than before. You held on. Not really. You were too small to know. But your hand closed. Daniel stared at the box, at the bracelet, at the name. For one suspended second, the room around him changed. Not into memory, because he had none, but into the possibility of one. A young woman in a hospital bed. A baby's hand closing around her finger. A name spoken into the space before anyone else could erase it. He had not been a blank. That did not fix what came after. It mattered anyway. Can you tell me? He asked. Margaret did not ask what he meant. The answer was in the silence between them. Across town in her small kitchen, Margaret sat at her table with the phone pressed to her ear. The old box was no longer there. For decades, it had occupied its hidden place in the cabinet, then the table, then her hands. Now there was only a faint, clean rectangle in the dust where it had sat before she mailed it away. She looked at that empty space. There was no box to open, no paper to unfold, no lid to close if the pain became too much. Only Daniel breathing on the line. Only the name. Margaret placed one hand flat on the table, over the empty rectangle. You were wrapped in a white blanket, she said. There was a blue stripe near the edge. I remember that because I kept looking at it when I was afraid to look at your face too long. Daniel did not speak. They put you in my arms, and I didn't know how to hold you. The nurse told me to support your head. You were warm, smaller than I thought a baby would be. Her voice trembled. She let it. Your hair was dark, damp right here. She touched her own temple, though he could not see. And your hand came out of the blanket. I put my finger near it, and you closed your hand. A sound came through the phone. Not a sob, not quite. A breath taken badly. Margaret closed her eyes. I said your name then. She had said it many times alone. Into pillows, into locked rooms, into the inside of her own mouth where no one could take it from her. But not like this, not to him. Her hand pressed harder against the table. "Samuel," she said. The name entered the line. Not the screen, not the paper, not the box. The line. For a moment, neither of them moved the silence away. Daniel did not call her mom. He did not say he forgave her. He did not say they would meet again, or that things were all right, or that the name had given back what had been taken. Margaret did not ask for any of it. She sat in her small kitchen under the yellow light, with the empty space on the table and the phone warm against her ear. On the other end, the man who had been Daniel all his life breathed once, carefully around the name he had been given before he could remember. And for the first time in 40 years, Samuel was not something Margaret kept. It was something he had heard.